Compass Mining is your trusted partner in Bitcoin mining. Whether you're investing in one machine or thousands, our customizable solutions are tailored to meet your needs. We are your experts in Bitcoin mining, offering a platform where individuals and businesses can purchase hardware, host machines, and access a range of ancillary Bitcoin mining services. We also specialize in large-scale site development and data center operations. Discover more at compassmining.io and see how we can power your success today. Hey miners, welcome back to the channel McNallie Money, the official home of power mining analysis. In today's episode, Anthony Power and I are pleased to welcome CJ Burnett. He's the Chief Revenue Officer at Compass Mining to the program. We've got a lot to go through, a very exciting year ahead for Compass, and that's what we're going to be talking about in today's video. Before we get into it, take a second, hit the like button, you guys. Big help to myself and the channel. If you're not already subscribed, McNallie Money, feel free to join, and let me know in the comment section below what you thought of today's interview. If you have any additional questions for Compass Mining and the team, and your outlook for the Bitcoin mining space in 2025. Now, with that being said, let's get into today's video. Okay, guys, so that's right. Today's podcast, we've got two of the finance experts in the industry, Anthony Power, our resident Bitcoin mining analyst, and CJ Burnett, the Chief Revenue Officer of Compass Mining, so CRO. CJ, your first time on the program, really excited to have you. Thanks for making time. Welcome to the show.
Yes, thanks, Bryce. Anthony, great to be able to jump on with you guys and talk a little bit about mining.
There you go. So first question, very fitting actually, CJ. How did you first find out about Bitcoin mining, and then eventually get involved with Compass Mining?
Yeah, absolutely. So my journey to Bitcoin was similar to a lot of others where, I found, started following Bitcoin back in 2017 bull market. I was kind of attracted to Bitcoin. I call it the number go up technology, right? Like you see the price really go up quite a bit, and he's like, what is this? Like, you want to learn more. So, so I say, I was attracted to the number go up technology, but I really stayed for the freedom money, right? So, really love the kind of the concept of separation of money and state. And it really got excited about it. And so just, continue to learn and grow, my knowledge about Bitcoin mining over the subsequent years. I think it was shortly after that I got interested in mining. But even at that point, there wasn't really, you could mine Bitcoin at your house, in maybe the economics were a little bit better back then to do that, but it was still challenging technically. I'm not the most, as you guys mentioned, I'm finance background, so not the most like hands-on technical guys. So, that was never really something that was super exciting to me. Of course, I also have a marriage that I have to think about when it comes to mining at home. So, that was something that, I kind of really set aside for a little while, the interest in mining there for a couple of years, but continued to learn about Bitcoin and just delve into the industry and learn more about it. My journey to Compass started, actually, it was more in the 2020 cycle, right? Post-COVID, I kind of got a refreshed interest. Obviously, the price of Bitcoin was starting to go up a lot again, and got a refreshed interest in mining. And actually, at that time, I really started to investigate, like, are there any people in the industry that are kind of serving small miners, like making it easy for people to mine Bitcoin that can't do it at their house, basically. And so that was really when I, started looking there, really wasn't a lot of providers out there. Actually, it was kind of interesting. How I found Compass was through their PR blast of like that, they launched the platform back in, I think it was like August of 2020, right? Is when I saw that come through my Coinbase app, right? Like they have a lot of like news articles and stuff like that in the app. And so anyway, I saw that and I was like, oh, this is exactly what I've been looking for. So I was actually Compass's third customer. So as a result of, that experience and onboarding and really just developing a relationship with the founding team, joined shortly after that, a couple months later, right around the time that they announced the seed round of funding from Galaxy Digital.
That's awesome. I mean, 2020 is probably about the time I started into Bitcoin mining space. But to go from a customer to your role now as a chief revenue officer, I mean, I'm an accountant, and I've been an accountant for nearly 30 years. tell us about, I mean, it's going to be different from what I'm used to, but tell us about the typical day in your role and some of the things that you're generally covering.
Yeah, so my role's actually changed a lot since when I first joined Compass. So, my background's in finance, CPA by trade. And then when I joined Compass, I actually joined in more of a finance, accounting, controller type role. Over the years have really transitioned to more operations. And then for the last 18 months or so, been focused on this chief revenue officer, which is really more about sales, marketing, really a focus on the customer. How do we deliver value for the customer? So I wouldn't say, in my role, there's not necessarily a typical day, which I actually really like, right? It's a lot of strategic planning, how do we add more value to the customer? Really a focus on two things, like how do we add more value to our current customers, and then how do we attract more people to Bitcoin mining. Now, those are really kind of the two key things I'm focused on. That looks a lot like, having a lot of calls with potential vendor partners, as well as obviously potential customer partners, things like that.
Very interesting. Now, to kind of extend on that point there, talk to us about some of the more significant or recent changes, projects, things you've implemented in this CRO position within your time at Compass.
Yeah, absolutely. So, really the last 2 years, I would say, we've been laser focused on our customer experience, right? So we really Compass found product market fit really quickly, for better or for worse. It kind of took off like a rocket ship in the 2021 bull market. And we learned a lot from that experience. We learned there was a lot more that we needed to do to support our customers that were already onboarded with us. So that's really been our focus for the last 2 years is how do we improve our systems? How do we improve our customer support infrastructure and just making sure we're delivering a best-in-class experience for those customers. And continuing to invest in like resources and tools. Obviously, content and learning is a big part of what Compass is about, but also things like, our marketplace, right? Where, we recognize that, well, there's a couple purposes for that. We recognize that circumstances change, right? So sometimes you're going to maybe need to sell because it's a need. But then there's also this very, important concept in our industry of a fleet refresh, right? So it might be a time like maybe your machine is getting less and less competitive relative to the industry. And so it's time for you to maybe sell your machine and upgrade into a new machine. So really just thinking about packages or products or even incentives for customers to, take their old generation equipment and move into new generation equipment has really been a focus for us. But then also just like I said, just overall just improving the customer experience, just making sure that customers not, it's not like, hey, we sell them a machine once and they, live out their contract and they leave. Like we obviously want to keep customers mining for generations or life cycles or 4-year halving cycles. And so how do we equip customers to continue to do that?
In terms of, you mentioned their customers, refresh machines. Talk us through, as a customer, I mean, are they having machines that they've purchased delivered to you, or do you offer that type of a service to a customer where they can buy the machine through you guys as an intermediary with one of the big suppliers? How does that work from a customer experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's really the core value proposition that we offer. We recognize that the industry continues to mature over time, but certainly 4 years ago and even today, there's a lot of I'll call it scammers or whatever, lack of a better word, in the industry where, there's a lot of opportunity for people to lose money, even in the process of sourcing hardware, right? So we like to stand in front of customers and say, hey, we can be that trusted partner for you. And we actually find that our customers prefer if they can just buy a machine that's already in the racks, as opposed to, we've seen, and you guys, I'm sure have talked about this, over the last couple of months, there's been a lot of extra friction that's come into the customs and shipping and things like that. And so a lot of our customers say, hey, I don't want to worry about that. Just give me a machine that's already in the rack that you can just buy and it's online to your, pointed to your pool account same day. right? So that's really been a focus for us is just continue to provide that, that optionality to customers. There obviously, that does come at a price. Sometimes it's easier if they take lead time or whatever. And so for customers that have maybe a little bit more price sensitive, that they want to buy large quantities or things like that, sometimes, we do have to think about bespoke offers or shipping those machines over from Asia, typically where they're manufactured. But yes, the typical customer experience is we actually have machines ready to go today. You can go to our website and actually buy the machine, and have that pointed to your pool account within 48 hours.
In terms of suppliers out there, we know there's the big suppliers like the Bitmains, there's the Micro BTs, the Canarms. Most people have heard of those three companies, but we're now seeing some new entrants coming to the market. In terms of this year, obviously Bitdeer will be providing their seal miner machine to the market. You've got the likes of Auradine, you've got the likes of Block. Are you are you dealing with other suppliers in the big three? Do you get to sort of test these machines before you decide to make decisions that will affect your future customers? How does that process work with suppliers?
Yeah, absolutely. So the big three are definitely the lion's share of, and it's a little bit two things to think about here. One is what do our customers want, right? And then the other is what can we support? And so, you know, by and large, the majority of what we've seen from demand from our customers has been on the Bitmain side, which isn't necessarily surprising. I think they have somewhat around 90% market share. And plus they're really cost competitive, right? So, at least for, the dollars per terahash kind of methodology. So that's really the majority of the machines on our platform. But we are at always, we're actually really excited about the more and more, I'll call it, competition in the manufacturing space, because we think ultimately that benefits the end customer, the end self miner, right? Because they have more optionality, they have more ability to decide for themselves what it is that they want out of their mining operation. We do tests, right? We're constantly evaluating whether it's the new entrants. Like, we want to test their hardware. Some of that's content driven, but more so it's like we don't want to sell a machine to a customer that's not going to work or it's going to break in a week, right? Like, that's a horrible customer experience. We don't want that, right? So we want to make sure that we're putting reliable equipment into the racks, and so that's really how we do test our any new infrastructure or new miners that we're bringing into the ecosystem. The interesting thing that kind of, we're seeing a lot of focus maybe from Bitmain on hydro, but you're also seeing like things that people don't really think about. They just say, "Hey, I want the latest and greatest miner." Is the infrastructure and how those new miners fit into the infrastructure, right? So, for example, I'll give the best example of that recently, and you guys have probably heard this from some of your others guests, or that the S21 Plus, the S21 Pro, and the S21 XP are vastly larger than even the S21 series, but also prior iterations, S19 series as well. And so that represents a hurdle, right? When you go to put those machines in the rack, in some cases that wasn't even communicated to customers, right? So they got these machines and they're like, oh, they don't fit in our containers, right? So anyway, a lot of it is, that's the benefit of testing, right? Is you learn those things, you say, okay, can we actually put these machines in this rack space? So anyway, that's a lot of what goes into the process.
Preparation and planning prevents poor performance. That's what you say in the military, and it looks absolutely right there. If a customer wanted to sort of like choose their own machines, and we know, say, I know off the top of my head, I think Bitdeer have like sold 35,000 or got 35,000 orders for machines this year from customers. Do they? I mean, I take it, sites have to, there's a lot of. It's not just about buying miners. You've got to physically look at all the attributes, all the sort of the environmental attributes that are required. How do you then sort of like look at site by site what you can offer a customer in terms of meeting their objective to be able to host their miner and deliver revenues for them?
100%. And I would say a large contingent of our customer base is not necessarily they're not necessarily going to go to that point of maybe sourcing direct from manufacturer, right? We're typically, dealing with customers anywhere from literally a minimum order quantity of one, right? So some of our customers have one machine, and we're happy to serve those customers. But we also have customers with thousands of machines. But even at that 1,000 machine level or 5,000 machine level, you're a lot of times you're not going direct to manufacturer. You're actually coming to Compass first and saying, hey, this is what I'm thinking. Is this a good idea? Or what are the implications of that? And so that's really a lot of the value that we can provide is say like, hey, this machine, maybe we haven't tested it right yet. And so caveat emptor on that, right? Like we can't guarantee or maybe it's, hey, these are specifics and these don't fit into this site because it's a container solution that isn't retrofitted or doesn't have adjustable shelving or whatever. And so, we can actually be that kind of that collaborative resource to those customers before they go and pull the trigger on a, multi-million dollar purchase.
Yeah, you're designing the whole package for them from their requirement that they've given to your Fed. So which is obviously it's to me it's self-explanatory, but it's good for the listener to understand that in that more context. In terms of hosting, which is your predominant service that you provide, we've noticed competitors using like a cloud hash rate service where you've bought the machines and they can buy hash rate from you. Is that something that Compass have looked at to see if that's a worthwhile business opportunity for them? It does happen in the market. Not saying it's happened big, but I've seen it happen at certain other peer competitors.
Yeah, for sure. There are definitely, I would say, some large companies that are doing that. I think BitFuFu is probably one of the large ones. I'm sure there are others. It's something that we've looked at, but we don't have any intention of pursuing it. There's a few reasons. One, our core business is in the U.S. and recognize the regulatory landscapes maybe getting a little bit more friendly in the U.S. or we expect it to get more friendly, but there's a lot of concerns around securities laws and things like that. And you do have to be pretty careful. Like, and that's why our core business is we sell a machine. We're not selling you hash rate. Like, that you are getting a machine. And of course, there's a lot of things to think about when you're actually getting machine. There are benefits, of course, to that, when you think from a tax perspective or other things. But we do recognize it's something that, one of the benefits of the hash rate model or, selling hash rate is a lot of customers, when they think about mining, they don't necessarily think about the fact that this is physical infrastructure or this is this is a computer that is prone to breaking, right? Like these servers aren't meant to last for 20 years, right? Like the typical life cycle is anywhere from 3 to 6 years, right? And so, I do think one of the advantages that hash rate sellers have is like you can kind of obfuscate that. You don't have to worry about, how do you solve that customer service friction when those machines break? From a Compass perspective, we're always thinking about how do we improve the experience? Like how do we improve uptime? If you're spending $5,000 on a piece of equipment or $10,000 on a piece of equipment, like you don't want that to break in, a couple weeks after you buy it, right? So of course there's manufacturer warranties and other things, but that also comes with downtime. So we're constantly evaluating like how can we deliver more and more uptime and get closer and closer to that maybe hash rate, but not physically, going down the rules of, stepping on any hurdles or issues from the securities laws perspective.
In terms of the service that you provide, we've seen machine prices in 2024, 2025 significantly lower than they were in 2021 when we went through the last sort of bull cycle where we saw I seem to remember S19s coming in at sort of $30 a terahash, all the way up to $90 plus a terahash. Some of these big public miners were paying then. God knows what the retail investors were paying at that point in time. But miner prices have predominantly been very, very low this last sort of 18 months. What are you seeing from a price perspective now, and what does that mean for return on investment for your customers?
You're 100% correct. Definitely in the 2021 bull cycle, we saw certainly pricing, we saw pricing in excess of $100 a terahash. So
Yeah.
yeah, that is definitely possible. And I think, as you guys know, hash price is still low, right? And so that's really the main driver of why these rigs remain at such low dollar per terahash pricing. Now, as we mentioned, that can change really quickly, right? So if you have a Bitcoin strategic reserve or some other, elimination of capital gains tax or something else that, there are, I'll call it turnkey right tail risks, right? Where price could re-rate pretty quickly. And when that happens, not only do you get the uplift from the revenue producing more, but then you also get the uplift of the scarcity of rack space, right? I think that's kind of this thing that we kind of forget. Scarcity of rack space can happen very quickly when mining economics change. So I think that's kind of the key thing. I do expect, I don't think prices have topped out for this market cycle because we really haven't seen much change at this point in the cycle. But I am cautiously optimistic. When mining economics change to the upside, you do start to see that re-rating pretty quickly on price per terahash.
That's great. Now, speaking of that re-rating, we've seen or heard from a number of the CEOs that they're reevaluating the hosting space. This was a segment of business that a lot of these miners had in the past. Most of them have unwound this or got rid of these hosting contracts. But recently, there's been a new light, I would say, in terms of hosting. So can you tell us from the host perspective, from Compass Mining perspective, why is this such a lucrative business model as opposed to self-mining or some of these other revenue forms?
Yeah, hosting is a very unique business, right? In the sense of you're really providing a service versus a self-mining operation, right? Which is you just want to have machines online and running and generating revenue for your shareholders. Why people are so interested in hosting, I think, is for two reasons. Primarily, it's driven by the fact that we are still in what I would call a mining bear market, right? And in a bear market, you have typically there are different ways to have hosting contracts, but one of the most common is fixed fee hosting contracts, right? Which is, you have a fixed dollar per dollar per kilowatt hour that you're paying as a customer, right? That provides a lot of downside protection to the host in the sense of they are just, they know what revenue they have a predictable revenue stream that they can forecast to their shareholders, right? Now, the probably the more compelling part of this from a host perspective is really the fact that they don't have we know that self mining is a very capital intensive business, right? Like as an investor in miners, you basically are expecting to have to upgrade your machines every 3 to 5 years, right? Certainly the largest public miners, which is I know, who you guys are talking to a lot, they they probably are even have a more aggressive upgrade cycle, right? Because they want to also always be broadcasting to the market where they have, the best in class fleet efficiency and things like that. So when you're a host, really the only, there's a couple ways to do it, but really the only capex that you have is the one-time investment in the physical infrastructure, right? And certainly you might, yeah, obviously you have maintenance and things, but you really have, call it a $300,000 to $400,000 per megawatt of investment in that infrastructure, which is more of a one-time thing that you can just kind of put behind you. Obviously, you depreciate it, but like it's not something you're doing every 4 years, right? When you're talking current economics on self-mining, right? You're basically signing up as an investor for a $1 million capex per megawatt investment every 4 years, right? That's asking a lot of investors. And so because of that, I think a lot of people are thinking a little bit more pragmatically about what's the right business model for our business. Like for some, it does make sense to just refresh aggressively every couple of years. And like that's what their investors are excited about. But if you're not in that top echelon of self miners, like I think it really, if you're trying to build a long-term sustainable business, profitable business, you really do have to think about being able to be flexible with business cycles. Like, okay, maybe now's the time to host, or maybe we want to mitigate maybe a partial hosting fleet, partial self mining, something like that. And I think that's why a lot of these smaller operators are thinking about that because it is they don't have to go to the market and constantly dilute their shareholders, or they don't have to go constantly raise money, and they can really focus on building a long-term business as opposed to just, increasing their self-mining exahash.
We've seen a lot of Bryce has already mentioned this, but we've seen a sort of a change, in dynamics this last 18 months or so. I remember when I got into this space, there was quite a lot of the miners that we cover on a regular basis were host miners as well. So even like Hive Digital, Bitfarms, they were hosting miners. DMG were a host company as well. But now we're seeing some of the miners coming through. There's one of the big miners, probably the biggest hosted miner out there at the moment, is a company called Kango. They've got something like over 32 exahash, growing to 50 in this quarter, if everything is led to believe. They are a Chinese company, but they're using, I think, Bitmain are hosting them at the moment at the facility that they've got. Are you having calls with larger size mining companies as opposed to just retail? Or is your operation more, addressed at the retail market? Are you going to be growing big enough to take on some, maybe even the public miners? I mean, we've just had a podcast today with Bit Digital, who are now being hosted by Soluna. Is Compass, a company that can offer services to maybe even the public miner sector?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're actively having conversations. We view ourselves as kind of a partner to the industry, right? Like, so we actively having conversations with the public miners, just trying to understand their needs. So there's a lot that we do that's not what I'll call retail facing. So, when you manage tens of thousands of machines, you have a lot of repair needs, or you have a lot of logistics needs, or even just like fleet refreshing and things like that. There's a huge market for secondary machines that have to find a home somewhere, right? So we're constantly having conversations with the public miners, and yes, I do think there's a opportunity for us to serve some of those, and we'll see kind of how those conversations continue to play out, but I do think there's a lot more that can happen on that side of things.
You mentioned something that Bryce and myself we've been to a few sites now, and repairs are something that I know happens in the space, but I wasn't aware of actually the significance. How do you address repairs at your sites there? Do you have on-site repairs? Do you send machines off to a third party for repairs? What's the process at Compass?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we take a mixed approach. It really depends a little bit on the facility as well as what's the volume, right? So we do have the ability to send techs on site to do, yeah, it kind of depends on what the nature of the repair is and what the volume is, but we do have periodically send techs to the site to actually do the repairs right on site. In some cases, we'll send it to our Denver service center where we can do some repairs as well. And we also lean on third parties as well to help sometimes with repairs if we have surge needs or things like that. But yeah, it's definitely a key part of it. When you have these machines, as you know, they're built when you're building machines for low cost, right? The expected result of that is they're sometimes going to break, right? So anyway, like being able to repair those machines has really been a key focus for us over the last couple of years, as we've talked about improving the customer experience, because it's one thing if a customer's machine breaks, which is already a problem, right? Nobody wants their machine to break, but then they also don't want it to be offline for 5 months, right? While it gets shipped or whatever, have issues with the warranty provider or whatever. So that's really a key part of delivering a good hosting experience, is having a good solution in place for, getting machines repaired.
And just taking that stage further, we've had conversations with some of the biggest miners who've had problems with certain models of miners. We had Riot last year talking about some of the problems they'd had with the S19s. We've now got Bitfarms saying they had massive amount of batches of T21s that originally were performing far greater efficiency than the box suggested that they came in, but are now, literally, trying to get these machines replaced or fixed to work at the right level of condition. What's the sort of I mean, do you sort of like bring this emphasize these potential issues with customers when they're looking at the right machine to buy?
For sure. And it's one of those things, and you even mentioned it in the Bitfarms example, is sometimes it's hard to know until the machines have been running, right? And some of it's even highly variable based on the specific climate, right? And so, as you guys know, we have a footprint all over the U.S. and all over North America. And so, like, a machine running one way in Texas might run a different way in Iowa, right? So that's kind of, a
Yeah.
unique dynamic and something we have to think through. But we've obviously seen some of that variability ourselves. We don't have a lot of T1s, or excuse me, T21s in our ecosystem, but certainly, have run into some issues in the past with some of the XPs that, I know those, I think that was probably the right example you were giving.
Yeah.
Certainly, especially in some of the hotter climates, they just weren't excelling there. But in colder climates, they were fine, right? So it's like, it's one of those things. Every new model has its own idiosyncrasies, and so you kind of have to figure that out along the way. Unfortunately, a lot of times you don't have the luxury of knowing that even after a few months of testing, right? It's like you kind of have to figure it out, and that's honestly one of the key, I think, things that you can do as a business is really like just figuring things out is kind of a key differentiator, right? Like certainly you can just buy new machines and maybe that's the most effective strategy for a public miner, but in most cases our customers don't have that luxury to just go buy new machines, right? So like figuring out solutions, how do we get them? Maybe it's in a different facility it'll run better, or maybe it's an upgrade to a different type of model where that we can offset some of that cost. So there's a lot of ways to think about it, but that's definitely something we run into because we have a lot of different models of machines in our ecosystem.
Now, CJ, you just mentioned Iowa. We wanted to get an update, a 30 megawatt facility there. This is a special one for Compass because this is a vertically integrated, self-owned facility. So can you get an update on the construction progress and whether or not we'll continue to see this vertically integrated strategy moving forward for Compass?
Absolutely, yeah. Definitely a big project for us and it's one we're really excited about. Any day now, that should be energized. It's one of those things. I think Shannon, our chief mining officer, who I know you guys know, will tell you that there's never a deployment that goes off without something going on. But so anyway, we were hopeful to get that online last week. We're pending some final approvals is where we're at right now. ASAP is where we're at. So that'll be the first 8 megawatts of that deployment here coming online as soon as possible, and then we also have the opportunity to expand it to the 30 megawatts like we talked about. And that'll require a substation upgrade and things like that. So that's something that we target for later on this year. But really excited to get that first site online. And yes, this is a core part of where we're heading. It's not something that happens overnight, of course, to just vertically integrate. But I do think it'll be a key. It'll be a ongoing conversation, right? We'll continue to want to acquire, develop our own sites, just so we can be a little bit more dynamic in the services that we offer our customers. You can be a little bit more dynamic as well with, for example, you mentioned before the public miners, right? They have very specific needs where, partnering with a third party host might not be a good solution for them. But when we have a vertically integrated solution, right, then they get more excited about it. So it's definitely, something we're excited about. I expect to continue to have lots of announcements on that front here as we go on this year.
It's been a conversation that many public miners who went down that sort of asset light strategy have sort of now changed and moved into the fact that owning infrastructure appears to be, a good option to have. Equally, though, we've seen miners who remained, having their machines hosted because, they don't have to necessarily have the staffing levels. Then they're passing that service onto a provider like you guys or a peer miner, and that way that's taken away from them. They pay a fee for that. They don't need all the sort of like head office operations costs that many miners have to incur. So there are benefits to both, but certainly when you talk of scaling a business, infrastructure, from my perspective, I'm a management accountant, so I deal in cost. And I do investment. I used to do investment appraisal when I was in the job, and so looking at that type of scenario, going from hosting to infrastructure, lease to infrastructure, is certainly something that that I'm sort of familiar with looking at that to help those that need to make decisions with the information I provide. But yeah, it's
For sure. And and this is something that we don't talk about. Obviously our core services, our hosting and hardware, procurement solutions. But, one of the things we don't talk a lot about, and this isn't maybe as relevant to some of the large public miners, but certainly when you're talking about some of the smaller public miners or even smaller private miners, right? Like ultimately, long term, there's a lot of value in having your own infrastructure. And the main reason for that, I think, is because of your ability to be flexible on your power strategy, right? In a hosting solution, typically your power strategy is keep it online as much as possible, and hopefully my revenue stream doesn't drop below my cost, right? Your marginal cost. But when you own the meter, of course, you can be a lot more flexible in most of these power markets. You can curtail when it makes sense to curtail, and you can run machines, older generation machines a lot longer, right? And if your goal isn't to be the next largest Bitcoin miner, your goal is to build a long-term profitable business. A lot of times, having your own infrastructure is really the way to do that. And the reason I bring this up is from a customer perspective. That was actually something that we've identified in our customer base, more on like the enterprise level, right? So obviously, a customer with one miner, it's not going to make sense to have your own facility, right? But we certainly help customers that have thousands of miners, and the natural progression of thing, we want to partner with them for more than just a hosting contract, right? And so the natural progression is, hey, maybe you're coming up on the end of your hosting contract, or maybe you just got started, but like, what does the long term look like for you, right? Do you want to have your own infrastructure? And if so, how can Compass support you? So that's something that our managed services team spends a lot of time and energy on, is having conversations with those customers and saying, hey, maybe a 5 to 10 megawatt facility, that maybe that's a perfect sweet spot for you because, Marathon and CleanSpark, they're not going to go buy it, right? So you're not competing with them, but it's like it's economically priced, it's small enough, but you don't want to figure out how to mine, like how to run a Bitcoin mining operation for 5 to 10 megawatts, right? So Compass has obviously developed a lot of expertise on that operation side, where we can come along and we can help you source the facility, but then also develop and operate the facility, right? And so that's kind of a unique thing that we've really spent a lot of time and energy on over the last 18 months, is like partnering with those customers and saying, hey, how can we support you on this side as well?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, it's like having the control. When it's your facility, you can, like you say, you can switch the miners on and off when it's required because it's about cost effectively like that. But when you're being hosted and machines need to be repaired, someone might say, well, which machines are going to get repaired first? My machines, your machines? And this is why we've seen some of the production numbers, from those companies that have had hosting machines not as great as the ones that have had their own infrastructure. You can see between the lines that there are issues there, and Marathon's probably the biggest example of why they've gone down the route, albeit 3 years after they said the asset light was the best thing to follow in this industry. But no, thanks for
Well,
responding to that.
yeah, no, exactly. And unfortunately, there's a little, and this is why it's important to have, like, this is where vertical integration excels, right? Is because unfortunately, there sometimes can be a misalignment of incentives when you have a host, right? Because their goal obviously is to make money, as everybody's is, and they're typically trying to do it at the lowest cost, right? So and they have other customers to support, right? And so when it's your own machines, you're going to do that as fast as possible. You're going to rank order it in the most efficient machine to the least efficient machine, like that just you do what makes sense, right? But in a situation where it's a host, like they're balancing a lot of competing interests, right? And also trying to do it in a low cost way to, for the benefit of their shareholders or their stakeholders. And so like that's why the vertical integration approach is very compelling. But of course, with Marathon, like they probably have the best access to capital in the industry, right?
Yeah.
So of course, vertical integration makes sense for them, whereas most others don't have that, right? And so that's where it's, kind of having that balanced approach. For some, a hosted solution does make a ton of sense, right? Because of access to capital, whereas others vertically integrating is the right option.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, good point.
Hey, now CJ, last one from my side, and you kind of talked about curtailment. I imagine the answer is maybe no here, but We've seen a lot of the pubcos curtailing in the colder months here, January specifically. Some of them get a benefit for doing so, some of them don't. Does Compass Mining either voluntarily or required to curtail? And if so, do you compensate the clients for that time?
Yeah, absolutely. So, curtailment is kind of, I like to think of curtailment as the reason that we get that Bitcoin miners get access to lower cost power is because of curtailment, right? If we were, if we were using our demand at the same time as everybody else, our power prices would be the same as everybody else's, right? And so, I think curtailment is kind of a twofold thing, right? So part of offering a viable economic model to our customers is like in offering them a low hosting rate is the expectation that there's going to be some percentage of time when power prices are high where we just have to shut off, right? That's just kind of table stakes for our industry. So that's kind of the first piece. But on the actual like curtailment for excessive downtime, yeah, that is something that we offer. We offer credits to our customers. So hey, if we have to be down a lot during a specific month, right? Obviously January we had these vast winter storms, specifically around the Midwest. At least that's where I noticed it. But so we had a lot of curtailment associated with that. And so when we have a lot of curtailment in a given month, right, then we'll pass credits back to our customer and say, hey, you were offline for, a lot. Like this is, we'll pass this back and recognize we weren't online.
In terms of 2025 now going forward and looking future, what are the sort of like the key growth priorities for Compass Mining?
Yeah, so we kind of hit on it, which is vertical integration, right? So getting this first site online and then quickly pivoting to the second site as well as continued expansion at our first site. So that's really our key focus is continuing to vertically integrate, offer being able to serve more customers as a result of that, as well as, continuing to provide more value to our current customers. So that's really a key focus for us. I would say outside of that, a key focus is continuing to grow I call it our operations or our managed services business, where we're partnering with not what people think of Compass, they think of our core, our legacy, buying hosting solutions, but really partnering with people that want to have that infrastructure exposure, but they don't want to build the internal expertise to maybe manage it, right? So being that partner to those people and saying, hey, we can operate your data center for you in an economic way, so you can continue to scale based on your capital availability as opposed to your labor availability, right? So that's really the two key focuses for us is continuing to grow our hosting business and then obviously our managed services business as well. 2024 obviously was a challenging year from like a business economics, mining economics perspective. So we're excited to kind of have that a little bit in the rearview mirror and really focus on, hey, 2025 is a year of growth, and really driving and seeing how we can excel and deliver more value for customers.
Final one for me before I hand you back to Bryce. In terms of systems that use, we've seen a lot of miners in the I'm going to say last 18 months, start switching to immersion cooling now. Obviously, the big miners and it's capital intensive. We've had members of companies that deal in immersion cooling who provide that service for miners, and they said in the next year or 2 years, immersion cooling will be the only option for a lot of these companies. Is it something that you're even considering, or think it's potential to give customers that benefit of maybe in the hotter climates be able to keep working around the clock effectively?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we are constantly evaluating kind of the different hardware or different infrastructure in the market and what's interesting, what's viable, and what makes sense, obviously, for our customers and our business. But we haven't seen so much of a demand for immersion, actually. Actually, where we're seeing more of the demand is on the hydro side. And one of the reasons why we find hydro interesting is because we think I'll call it the break even or the economics, the CapEx economics make a lot more sense for hydro today than immersion. I think immersion will continue to improve and the cost per megawatt will continue to kind of come in line with some of the other solutions. I don't think it's there yet.
Yeah.
Or at least that's our base case. Hydro is interesting because we in hydro you get a lot of the benefits of immersion from the, you're not having such wild variation in chip temperatures and breakage as a result of that. Um, but you're not having all of that extra capex associated with it, right? So as a result, I do expect us to continue to explore and maybe have some announcements around the hydro side of things. Immersion is, I would call that a longer lead time item. I don't think we're quite there yet. I think Shannon, I don't know if Shannon talked to you about his perspective on immersion, but he's not the biggest immersion guy. So we got to get over the Shannon hurdle before we get there on Compass. But saying that tongue in cheek, of course, I do think hydro is very interesting and something we're evaluating very seriously.
Yeah, I think time will tell because we've yet to see any data whatsoever come out from the industry.
Mhm.
And bear in mind, it's going back well over 2 years ago since immersion cooling was installed at the Rockdale facility, which is Riot's flagship facility. And I asked the question then, when will we start seeing some of the data to show it's a viable way of mining Bitcoin? And 2.5 years later, we still haven't seen any updates. But the providers of immersion cooling are saying it's great, and they did give some sort of like, to be honest, in fairness to them, they did give some data to support what they were doing, and you can go on like YouTube and see it there. But you're quite right. As many advocates of immersion cooling, there's equally a number of advocates who are sort of saying it ain't worth it. They're getting as much from the air-cooled machines there. It was just interesting to understand sort of technology and how you're sort of looking at the latest technology and great you brought up the hydro because not a lot of people will understand about the benefits of that, especially from you guys.
I'll add to that, maybe Anthony jumping in on that is, that's kind of a key, and I think one of the reasons why you haven't heard a lot about hydro is kind of we talked about it on the infrastructure issue with the S21 pluses and pros and XPs, is that infrastructure kind of is, I'll call it the tail that wags the dog, right? Like you can build some new great, like the best, most efficient miner, but if nobody can use it because their infrastructure doesn't support it, like it's not going to work, right? Or you're not going to sell anything. So I think we've actually seen a real focus from Bitmain specifically on hydro. And as a result of that, I think, they were even from what we've seen, they've kind of dropped out a little bit of the air-cooled market. Like we haven't seen them signing as many hosting contracts on the air-cooled side and really have shifted more of their focus to the hydro-cooled side, right? And I think that what that tells you is they've made machines, they don't have the infrastructure to support it, so they're trying to kind of, for lack of a better way, to kind of artificially create that demand so that there's more and more long-term demand for their hydros, right? Because if they can get the infrastructure built for their hydros, then they're going to sell more of them, right? So we're still early in that process. There's not a ton of hydro infrastructure out there. Same with immersion, but that is something I do expect to see come on in a more material way over the next 2 years.
Yeah, it's a good point and something we see in a lot of these emerging industries to think about all the charge stations for the Teslas and the chicken and the egg discussion there. So CJ, a great conversation today. I wanted to give you the opportunity to wrap up if there's anything we've missed. We'll obviously leave all the Compass information in the video description below, but great to have you on the podcast and get your perspective as the Chief Revenue Officer.
No, I really, really appreciate it, Bryce and Anthony. It's been great to chat with you guys, and always excited to come on and really appreciate all you guys are doing for obviously educating the masses on Bitcoin mining and what's new and exciting and all the new trends. So really excited and thank you guys for having me on.
Of course, we look forward to having you back on soon. Thanks so much. Leave a comment in the section below, hit the like button, feel free to subscribe. Talk to you guys tomorrow.